Okay, I think we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I am Dylan from Kale. We're glad you've joined us for this session, Empowering Digital Resilience, a Trauma-Informed Approach. Before we get started, I'd like to share a couple quick housekeeping tips. Attendees are muted, but please introduce yourself and meet fellow attendees in the chat box. This session is recorded and will be available for 90 days after the conference. And there's a survey that can be found in this events page within the virtual hub. We will ask you to complete after the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome Zandy Wright of Right to Learn to begin their presentation.
Thanks, Dylan. Very happy to be here. Hi, everyone. Let's see, I am keeping an eye on the chat. Would love for folks to take a moment to introduce themselves as Dylan recommended. This is meant to be a workshop, and so I hope to have folks participating in the chat and contributing their own ideas as we talk through our content for today. I see a couple of folks have also already started filling out our polls. So the two questions about how would you rate your own confidence in digital spaces? And then also, what levels of digital confidence do you see among your learners? And I do mean levels, right? Because we assume that that in any group of learners that we can expect to see sort of a range. So, all right, well, I will, Dylan, I will share my slides and you can let me know if they're coming through correctly. Okay, how are we doing?
We're good.
Great. All right. So yes, please do continue filling in the polls as folks arrive, and please do feel free to have that chat open. In fact, there will be some points here where I am asking you some questions, inviting you to sort of participate with some of the content. So having that chat open will be really helpful. So let's dive in. So we're talking today about empowering digital resilience, a trauma-informed approach for adult educators. So I'm Zandy Wright. This presentation was co-written with my colleague Kaveh Sadagian. He unfortunately was not able to join the conference this year, but this truly was a collaborative effort between both of us. So I wanted to make sure that his work is also recognized. And so a little bit about sort of my background and sort of as like a positionality statement, why digital resilience, how I came to this work and how I think about this work. So that's me in the top line. I have a background and a master's degree in adult learning and online education specifically. And my sort of journey to digital resilience and teaching digital skills started in libraries. I had a full-time role with the Denver Public Library teaching foundational, sort of getting started with email and what does this button on my computer do, those kinds of classes. And so Kaveh and I overlapped and currently work together at edX on the learning strategy team, but we've also sort of had each of us our own journeys that bring us to this collaborative space. So mine is really focused on the digital skills and the training digital navigators, thinking about how we teach these skills, but also about the social and emotional aspects of that, not just the skills themselves. And so Kaveh, you'll see a lot of his lens coming through when we start to talk about the affective aspects of learning, the somatics, and the trauma-informed background. So we've been talking already a little bit about digital resilience. We should pause and define that a little bit because we're probably all familiar with digital skills. I'll give you my definition and then another set of experts' definition. My definition is that digital resilience is the thing that differentiates someone who can navigate with care, with extreme caution, and sort of can figure out an online environment. But as soon as something changes, then they're back to a place of struggle, back to a place of anxiety. Contrast that with someone who, when a new environment comes up or when a familiar environment changes, they're able to roll with that and be responsive and to continue to have a good sense of self-efficacy in that environment. So that's my definition. There is actually a UK Council for Internet Safety Digital Resilience Working Group. And so they say that this is a dynamic personality asset. So it's something that we can cultivate through digital activation. This is not, or it's not exclusively learning how to keep yourself safe online and avoiding scams and being extra super cautious. This is something that happens through engaging with opportunities and with challenges. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So we're actually going to do, we'll have a little bit of an opportunity to experience this together as a group. So I'm very excited to announce to all of you that we have a new technology system that you will all be using from now until whenever, starting on Monday. And here it is. And yes, this is mandatory. You will be required to use this, and good luck. So hopefully none of us have had quite this experience, but we've probably all had the sort of, professionally, we get a new tool handed to us, we're expected to learn it and figure out how to navigate, and we're not necessarily given all of the resources that we might need. So of course, I will not actually be requiring you to use this tool, but I'd love to hear in the chat, first of all, just if this was real life, right? If you now needed to be able to jump in and use this, what feelings come up for you? What is your reaction? And I know not everyone might have the chat open. I will say for me, this environment gives me a lot of anxiety, even as a fairly digitally confident person, right? There's a lot going on. And particularly, yes, particularly when we're sort of feeling pressure to use this, when this is not an opt-in situation, I think that quickly becomes overwhelming. Yeah, I see a couple of comments in the chat. So some folks love a technology challenge. Cindy, I love that, but not everybody loves a technology challenge. David points out yet there's so much on this screen that it can be overwhelming to even know where to look. And Amanda, I love this. Let's dive in and see where I can break this. That is actually an excellent digitally resilient mindset, but sometimes a tricky one to cultivate, especially for more novice digital learners. So let's talk a little bit then about sort of why this exercise. So we're approaching this partly through and good question, Danielle. Are there instructions? Hopefully, yes. But for today, you have not been provided with any instructions. You will be diving in on your own. Good luck. So this is a sort of an exercise in bringing up our novice gaze. So probably for most of you, this is not a tool that you already feel confident navigating, that you have a lot of previous context for. If I had pulled up, say, Canvas or another learning management system, your reaction probably would have been pretty different. Like, yeah, I know how to navigate that. I can figure it out pretty easily. So we're practicing sort of seeing things through a novice's eyes. And this is actually an exercise that can be really useful to do in your own actual technology interfaces that you use for teaching, to close your eyes, pause for a moment, and then open them and try to look at it from the viewpoint of someone who doesn't already know that space and doesn't know what they're looking at. So for the folks who expressed feeling a little bit anxious about needing to navigate this tool, we got some answers to this already. So what is it that makes this interface or this imagined experience intimidating? I'll call out a couple of things I saw in the chat, but please feel free to add other things as well. So David, you mentioned there's so much data. Part of the form that expertise takes in a lot of cases, and especially in learning a new digital environment, is just the ability to know where to look and to be able to chunk information so that I know this part is the part that I should be paying attention to now, and all of this other stuff over here I can currently ignore. Right. And we do that very automatically once we have developed our own sense of confidence. But novices, digital novices, or just people who are new to a particular interface can really struggle with that. Yeah. Yeah. And Cheryl, I love that. So it doesn't look intuitive and it doesn't look like other systems you've used. I love that you're calling that out. So yes, this is not already familiar. And so, even though you maybe have prior experiences with other technology tools, there's the sort of specific context specific confidence doesn't necessarily translate over to this one. Yeah, that's a really good point. For the folks who, if we have folks in the room, is anyone here a sound engineer or a musician, and you actually looked at this interface and went, yeah, no big deal. I know what that is. That was not my reaction for the record. Okay, Cindy, so musician here. So Cindy, I'm gonna make a guess that you, looking at this, that you at least had a little bit more context maybe than some of us for what we might be looking at and how to kind of make sense of this interface. Yeah. So if you have prior context, like being a musician or, doing, yeah, great. So prior context, being a musician, doing sound engineering, this is an audio editing software, then that context really helps you to feel a lot less phased, a lot less anxious about this. There's sort of another group of folks who said, I'm ready to dive in. I'm comfortable like taking a stab at this, even though it doesn't already look familiar. And that I'm going to connect in just a moment to another set of experiences you probably have, which is not with this specific interface, but with learning new technologies in general. You know that that's something you're capable of doing, even if it maybe takes a little bit of effort. Yeah. And I will say, Amanda, we're not, in this session, we're not going to get a whole lot into like UX or design adjustments to support digital novices. That is, I think, an extremely important aspect of this, and a whole other talk that we could give about designing online learning spaces to be more friendly to folks who don't already feel comfortable. Because yes, I completely agree. Okay, so let's pull back and generalize this a little bit. So rather than looking specifically at this interface, I want to take the sort of perspectives that we talked about and reframe them through the lens of self-efficacy and familiarity. These are probably already familiar concepts for educators. So self-efficacy we define as a learner's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish tasks. So for those of you who said, I mean, yeah, this looks kind of gnarly, but I think I could figure it out, you have a strong sense of self-efficacy of your own ability to navigate even a new technology space. So self-efficacy says, I am capable of X, of learning, of figuring this out, of breaking things without fearing that there's going to be sort of major consequences. So self-efficacy, you'll see with the sort of heart icon, is more on the affective side, and it's also more sort of internally located. So learners have confidence in themselves, even when the situation is not necessarily friendly. Contrast that with familiarity. So Cindy's a musician. Cindy looks at this and says, yeah, I've seen something like this before. I have sort of specific and relevant prior experience that's going to let me figure this out in a more comfortable or a more confident way. So this is externally located. This is more cognitive rather than affective. And this is saying, I already know about X and I can apply that knowledge here. So we're going to take these sort of two dimensions of self-efficacy and familiarity and make ourselves a lovely sort of 2x2 matrix, which I'm sure folks have seen in other contexts before. So when we think about learners in our classes or in our programs who are navigating online spaces as part of their learning experience, right? In an ideal world, we want learners to have both high self-efficacy and high familiarity. They've done some online learning before. They know how to navigate a learning management system, even if they haven't seen this specific one. They feel confident figuring it out. And that means that they're not necessarily getting hung up on the digital environment itself. They're able to really focus more on the content. So that's our ideal space, is high self-efficacy, high familiarity. And of course, not everybody is going to fall into that sort of optimal zone. And it's easy to think about this as sort of, well, we want to move everybody into that zone. And, if you're starting with low self-efficacy and low familiarity, let's just sort of like boost you up as quickly as possible. And I want to just like pause. We're going to get to the trauma-informed part of this in just a moment. But so pause and acknowledge that isn't going to be certainly not immediately achievable for every learner. And for some learners, getting all the way into high self-efficacy, high familiarity may not even be the right goal. But we can say, okay, if you're starting out here, how can we get you higher on one of these? How can we support your self-efficacy, even if you're going to continue seeing unfamiliar environments? How can we give you some practice getting familiar with this environment so that you can increase that familiarity, even if we're not actively working on the self-efficacy piece. So there's lots of pathways to help learners get to a more comfortable zone on this matrix and to help support that cultivation of resilience. All right, now I want to pull back a little bit and talk about why we don't want to just jump right into, okay, let's get you all the way up to high in both areas. So many of you may already know about this if you have a trauma-informed background or if you go to therapy, which is a place that I learned a lot of this. This is also coming largely from my colleague Kaveh. So your nervous system stress response, your sympathetic nervous system, often called the fight or flight response, activates in response to a perceived threat. And perceived is important here. I will say I am a person who experiences panic attacks. If you have ever experienced a panic attack, you know that your system does not have to be actually under like intense biological life-harming threat for it to be pretty convinced that it is, right? So that activation, if we start out in this perception of safety, this, sort of freedom, food, fun, friends, this very happy and relaxed zone. And then as we perceive threats, as we get higher activation of that nervous system response or that stress response, we can move up into this sort of yellow zone where we're perceiving danger. We're getting a little bit closer into that fight or flight response. So moving into, in some cases, what we can call an I can attitude. This response is designed to enable humans, including going back thousands and thousands of years, to take action to keep themselves safe, right? To run away, to fight, etc. And so moderate levels of activation, getting up into like the low parts of this yellow zone, can boost learning, can boost performance, can make us actually more effective. This shows up in all kinds of different ways and different kinds of performance. Where we run into a problem, of course, is when we get higher into that yellow zone or up into that red zone. So too much activation, too much stress response triggers our survival mode and basically prioritizes lots of other things that are not cognitive function and not the ability to learn complex tasks or learn new environments. We get into this place of I can't, of immobilization, of sort of shutting down if we get too far into that. So I'm curious in the chat, actually, for the folks who are in the room, how familiar were you already with this sort of concept or this framing? You give like a 1 to 5, like 5 is very familiar and 1 is this is mostly or almost entirely new. Cool. Okay, so some 4s, some 5s, excellent. 3.5, good. I love the little bit of a hedge. I love it. Okay, good. So this is not necessarily brand new for folks, but we want to think about then how do we apply this to supporting learners with their building their digital resilience specifically. So I want to layer on one additional component, which is this idea of allostatic load. So allostatic load is the physical and psychological wear and tear of chronic stress. So where typically we would look at this graph as sort of being in response to a specific situation or a specific incident, allostatic load is an accumulation over time of the impacts of chronic stress and chronic vigilance. And so what that can look like is that over time, you sort of no longer have as much access to this green, comfortable, safe zone. You end up living a little bit more consistently long-term in a state of like partial activation already, which means that then sometimes when something stressful does happen, that can push you up into that terror and overwhelm space much more quickly. This is, again, as I said, I am a person who experiences panic attacks. This is very relevant for me. And the kinds of things that can contribute to allostatic load, of course, it's things like actual survival needs, literal, food, housing, things like that. So when we're working with learners who have core human needs that are not being met or that have not always been met consistently, then that can be a big factor. But it's also true that we experience allostatic load and stress in relational ways and in sort of as part of systems of oppression. So I love this quote from Virginia Wynne: if you're vigilant against someone being rude to you and trying to figure out if it's because of your race or gender, then your body is constantly feeling like it needs to prepare. So this is where, we're thinking about learners using a learning management system, and we're trying to help them be successful there, but there's a lot going on in those cases that's not just the learning management system, right? There's a lot of other sort of accumulated and sort of like other contextual stressors that can really contribute to how ready they are to engage. So let's bring this back to then our framework of self-efficacy and familiarity. So in digital environments, sources of stress in sort of a situational or an acute way, that might be active anxiety about navigating this technology space or this learning setting, right? The example of the interface that we looked at before, where here's this specific thing that I am feeling extremely stressed out about. And especially if we have sort of turned up the pressure, turned up the expectation that you need to jump in and hit the ground running, that can really increase that stress and start to push people out of that sort of high self-efficacy, high familiarity zone. Contextual stress also is relevant here. This might be sort of general heightened vigilance because folks have negative experiences with other learning environments in the past, negative experiences with digital tools in general, or both. And I want to actually call out, sometimes it doesn't even need to be your own negative experiences with digital tools. I teach a lot of, to this day, a lot of sort of technology foundations classes, especially for older adults. And we have so many headlines and sort of scary news articles about folks being scammed and giving away all of their life savings, or accidentally giving someone access to their all of their information. And those are real risks. I want to just pause and say, like, that's a real thing that happens. But that doesn't need to have happened to you in order for you to have just this heightened sense of vigilance, this again, getting into that sort of middle yellow or even up into the red zone of, I don't feel safe in this space. And then finally, we touched on this a little bit with that allostatic load, chronic or systemic stress related to a digital environment or totally separate. So internalized self-criticism, things like, I am not a technology person. I'm just bad at this, right? We internalize these narratives of, this is not for me, or everyone else knows this except for me, and so it's pointless for me to even try. We see that long-term allostatic load coming from lots of other sources besides technology. And then, as we said, even just unmet survival needs, either currently or in the past, that have contributed to people's chronic stress. All of those can add this in. And so what happens, of course, is that for the learners who are in some of these like lower familiarity or lower self-efficacy or both, we get sort of stuck, right? It becomes much more challenging to even be ready to prioritize learning a new digital experience because we're much closer to that space of, I'm in survival mode, or I gotta focus on things that are that feel within my power, and this doesn't feel within my power. So we're going to talk in just a moment about some ways that we can actually actively support learners in trying to still move out of those lower self-efficacy and lower familiarity zones. But I want to keep in mind this idea that we can't just move straight to like, well, this is important, so we have to learn it, or let me show you this one time and then you should be good to go, right? The trauma aspect of this and the stress aspect of this is a real significant mediator in people's ability to learn and to navigate confidently. All right, so coming back to this delightful interface, I'm going to ask you all a couple of questions again. We touched on some of these, but if this were real, right? If you had been handed this technology tool and told you have to learn it, and starting Monday, you will be using it in all of your classes, what strategies would help you as a learner to figure this out, to start to get more comfortable? so that you're in a place of I can rather than in a place of I can't or of shutdown. I've mentioned some of these already, but I'd love to hear them again in the chat if you don't mind. And I know I asked a question that probably has a longer answer, so I'm giving folks a little bit of time to respond. Yeah, Cindy, I love this. So seeing a demo of the product, right? I don't need to touch it yet. I can watch someone else navigate it and see how they interact with the system before I need to dive in myself. Yep, Cheryl says, similarly, an orientation class or a video explicitly teaching this particular environment. And yeah, Amanda, so creating time to play with it, yes, that ability to safely experiment. And I think you were the one who also said that, let me see where I can break this. So being able to experiment, figure out what works, what doesn't. And then also YouTube, right? We know that YouTube is a source of lots of great sort of technology overview resources and tools. And there's also sort of the support documents, the help pages for the tools that we're using. And so I'll call out that a lot of folks in this room probably have had to learn various complex technologies at different times in the past. And so we sort of know these strategies that we can bring in. In some cases, especially for true digital novices, knowing that you can go to YouTube, or Amanda, I love the verb to YouTube it, knowing that you can YouTube it, right, is a thing that people learn through experience, and true digital novice learners don't have that resource yet. So we can teach that. Yeah, and Cheryl, also a designated person, a human being who you can ask your questions of, absolutely. So those strategies, I heard some strategies about supporting familiarity. So, can I see a demo? Can I, even just get in there and play around and understand the interface itself? And it's interesting and not surprising to me that for this group that we're thinking about this mostly from the lens of how do I increase my familiarity with this? Because, as people who are attending an online conference, probably most of us in this room have a reasonably solid sense of self-efficacy already around digital technology tools, right? So we might look at this and feel stressed, but we probably don't feel all the way into like, I can't do this. This is not possible. And so instead, the strategies we use are the ones that are more cognitive in nature, more supporting that familiarity. For learners who are who need to really build the self-efficacy piece first, whether that's technology-related self-efficacy or just learning self-efficacy in general. So a couple of strategies that we'll talk about. You'll notice the color bars. I'm starting with the red one. This is for learners who are really in that space of like, I can't, I am stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. I just would like to not. So starting with just a check-in, right? This sounds so simple, but learner encouraging their emotional and somatic awareness of that reaction that they're having or that response, and helping them to be able to say, okay, how am I, here's this thing I'm supposed to learn, and just like pause, how am I feeling right now? What does my body feel like right now? Am I, I've got my shoulders up around my ears. I'm sort of like pulling my hands back from the laptop or from the smartphone because I don't want to touch anything. Just identifying those feelings. And I cannot stress this enough, acknowledging how normal and healthy those feelings are. Right, that it is completely normal to be anxious about new technology spaces, especially if you don't have a lot of experience there yet, especially if you have learned that you need to be really vigilant around new tools or around technology in general. So just starting with that, the affective piece first. Then we'll start to get a little bit more into some of the tactics around familiarity. So a thing that I do quite a lot when I teach technology classes is I explicitly teach pattern recognition. I'll give an example of this in just a moment. But again, as relatively savvy digital users, we are probably all doing somewhat without thinking, a strategy of, this is new, but I recognize, this icon is, a webcam icon. I know I've seen a webcam icon before. I know what that looks like. Even if I haven't seen it here, that knowledge will transfer. And so helping learners to, first of all, identify what they do know, and then be able to see, okay, in different environments, maybe I haven't seen this before, but I've seen something like it, and I can bring that knowledge across. So like I said, I'll give an example of how I often approach that in just a moment. This came up in the chat, and I love this. So safe experiments, providing low stakes opportunities to explore. And this is critical, to make mistakes without harm, right? If I'm learning a new learning management system, and I am trying to upload my assignment 5 minutes before the assignment is due, I am very worried about possibly breaking something and not getting my assignment in on time and having other consequences. That's not a time or a space in which I can really safely experiment with that tool. Probably what I need in that case is actually a sandbox. I think someone mentioned this in the chat, a sandbox course that is not a real course, that I'm not being graded on, that nobody is going to judge me if I, accidentally post my discussion post before I'm ready. So having that environment where we can really explicitly say, this is yours to play with. You're not going to break anything important. Go nuts. I recently taught a class about, this was again for older adults, so not in necessarily an adult education context, but about using the camera in your smartphone, and had folks very surprised to learn that you can just play with all the settings in the camera and see what they do and not be worried about, like, am I going to break something? Is this going to be sort of cause irreparable harm to my device? So really naming those opportunities and encouraging folks to experiment. And then finally, and I saw a lot of this in your responses in the chat, knowing what your support network is and where to find it. And again, we have experience with YouTubing things, with looking for an instructional video or finding a person to ask those questions. The other thing that I see a lot among less confident digital users is this sense that everybody else knows this, and I don't know how they know it. They just all magically know it, and I don't know it, and that's like a fundamental difference between us. So at least once a class, I try to make a point of having someone, if someone asks me a question that I don't fully know the answer to, truly saying, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. Let's Google it together. This is like a foundational digital skill that we probably all possess, but that is a learned skill, right? This is not a sort of an innate set of knowledge that folks have. So I'll talk through just a couple of these in a little more detail. I mentioned I was going to give an example of pattern recognition. So this environment is probably familiar to all of us. In fact, we are in some way using this space already. This is the Zoom platform. You can see all of the various Zoom buttons at the bottom. This is, by the way, a good moment to pause and just do a brief novice gaze exercise. You probably have, if you've used Zoom before, you know how to figure out what those different buttons do. Even with just that row at the bottom of different icons, if you were coming into this having never seen this before, there's a lot happening here and a lot of sort of different symbols and settings and things to potentially decode. But so this is maybe an environment that we're somewhat familiar with. We've seen Zoom before. Probably most of us have had the experience of, we're pretty fluent in one particular video conferencing tool, and then we get kicked into a different one for some reason. We're meeting with someone else and the buttons are in different places and they do different things, and suddenly we're back in a place of that sort of struggle. How do I figure this out? So this is Google Meet, if you're not already familiar with Google Meet. And again, the teaching, the pattern recognition, often I will actually pull up to similar interfaces side by side. And even for learners who haven't seen either of them before, we can talk about, okay, what are the buttons that you see that look quite similar, right? The microphone and the camera buttons are not identical, but they're sort of recognizably, they correspond to each other. Let's talk about, in one case, the react section is a heart. In the other case, it's a smiley face, but in both cases, that's indicating sort of feelings or responses to what's going on. So we can do some really intentional teaching of pattern recognition to help them figure out, okay, what do I actually know? And then what's new and different that I need to explore. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but so support network and research skills. Again, a strategy that I use in smartphone classes that you can apply to lots of other things is if I'm teaching a class that's about smartphones, one of the very first skills that I teach is how to find the about phone section in your settings, specifically because I want you to know what type of phone you have, not just Android, not just iPhone, but like what is the actual device model that you're working with? Because as again, probably fairly savvy digital users in this space, that lets me do things like this, right? I have a Pixel 8, great. I'm going to Google Pixel 8 beginner guide, or I'm going to go to YouTube and look for Pixel 8 tips. And having that specific piece of knowledge can help unlock their access to a lot of other resources. Again, these are things we have all learned to do, but that are not, they're not innate skills. They're things that are worth actually explicitly teaching. All right, I want to pause here and just talk a little bit more about actually implementing this in your teaching or in your program if you're in an administrative role. So a couple of points about program models. A thing that I hear quite often is, Sandy, this sounds great. I love that you get to do this in your library classes all the time. I am trying to teach English language, or whatever the specific area is that your expertise is. And I am not teaching a digital skills class necessarily. And so I don't know what you want me to do. So this is a very valid concern, especially in environments where our time is a scarce resource. So if possible, I always advocate for programs to include opt-in resources for learners to actively do this kind of learning, but to have that be available in addition to whatever other instruction they're getting. So, similar to maybe a writing center model in a university setting, I can make an appointment with the digital navigator for my program. I can sit down with them in a safe and a low stress environment and have them actively support me walking through the different things that I need to learn where that's possible. If that's not currently part of your program and you're seeing learners who really struggle with digital spaces, encouraging your program to have a digital navigator available, or even have just a person or an orientation setting that can help address this, I think is really, really helpful. And implicitly integrating these skills throughout your curriculum to just help to reinforce, I think is also really, really valuable. So when if you're asking your students to use a particular tool as part of their assignments, right? Taking the 5 or 10 minutes to do a quick walkthrough, maybe that's recording a quick walkthrough video that they can watch, or maybe it's doing a quick demo if you have a live class setting to do that in. But just pausing briefly to address that can, one, help to teach the very specific skills at work, but then two, just normalize and accept the fact that this can be a learning curve, that this is not necessarily something that you're just expected to already know. And then some ongoing principles, these again for a community of educators will probably not surprise anybody. But so finding that zone of desirable difficulty, right? We said that when we're thinking about stress activation, that a certain level of activation is actually helpful, that encourages you to learn and grow, it improves your performance. And so helping learners to find and embrace what is for them a zone of productive struggle, specifically to technology, right? You're probably already doing this in the other ways that you're teaching or in the other parts of your program, but helping them to get to that place of productive struggle around technology as well. And then finally, and this is why I talk about this as digital resilience and not just digital confidence. We heard about this in the keynote session talking about AI this morning, preparing your learners and yourself for the fact that it's not going to stay the same, right? We're not going to just memorize all of the buttons and then never have to learn a new setting or a new set of capabilities ever again. That part of being a digital citizen in the 21st century is just acknowledging that we're going to keep seeing ongoing changes AI is kind of the biggest, most recent or most visible example, but this has been part of our experience of technology for decades. And so this is I think, a helpful reframe for folks who maybe feel like, well, there's so much to catch up to that I'm never gonna get caught up. There isn't actually caught up in like a lasting sense, right? That even people who feel caught up at the current moment are gonna have to do some relearning in the future. And this is a normal part of that process. So, okay. I want to actually just pause because we have a little bit of extra time. So thank you all for your participation in the chat. I'll put up my sort of contact slide, but also if there's anything we want to go back to or any specific questions or challenges that have come up in your programs. Let's see, I think we do have something in the Q&A. Yes, okay, so great question about beyond the intersectionality of race and gender, do you notice trends in older student populations struggling with this more? Great question. So I think the shortest answer that will probably not surprise folks is yes, but like yes with an asterisk. So you've heard me say multiple times that the ways that we navigate these tools and that we learn how to do research are learned skills. They are not innate. So there is this sort of idea, or we could call it even a myth, of the digital native, of like people that are just born knowing how to do this. And that, first of all, there's good research that shows that that's not consistently true. That's another conversation for another day. The thing that I think is consistently true is that we become comfortable with the tools that we are exposed to particularly at times in our lives when we're able to learn things and to adapt more quickly. So if you've ever seen, I have a 4-year-old nephew, if you've ever seen a toddler or a 4-year-old interact with like mom's smartphone, they are absolutely fearless because they've been seeing these things for their entire lives, and they will just touch whatever and not worry about breaking it. And if you learn, or if you're introduced to those technologies at a different time in your life, or in maybe a less like safe setting, then that does become a lot more challenging to learn. The distinction I want to make here is that yes, older generations that were not introduced to these technologies at a younger age or in a professional setting, yes, they do often struggle with this. There's also research that shows that even among the same age cohort, so first-year college students in like a traditional 4-year college setting, that students who had a computer at home growing up interact with computer differently than learners who had access to computers at school. They used the computer lab, they learned how to do the foundations, but they didn't have the direct access to the ability to just play and experiment and do things on their own time. So there's sort of core differences, even when you control for age, even when you control for access to those technologies in a school setting. So that was a long answer to a really good question. But yes, I would say that age is one dimension, but definitely not the only one that can drive that. Yeah, really good question. All right, switching back over to the chat. And if folks have additional questions, I'd love to encourage you to put those in the Q&A as well. I'm also happy to go back to some of the other examples that we talked about. Let's see, one other thing I'll say while we're here is if you come away from this session feeling like, I would really love for the program that I'm part of to more actively incorporate digital skills or digital resilience, a thing to know is that there's currently a lot of new funding coming in from the Digital Equity Act. That act was passed in 2021 as a response to the COVID pandemic. Those funds are now hitting states' pockets and hitting sort of like local coalitions and local governments' pockets. And it is in the billions with a B of dollars, specifically dedicated to helping folks develop their digital skills, get access to internet, get access to devices. So if you're thinking, I would love for our program to hire a digital navigator, we work with learners who really need this support, but we just don't have the budget. do a little bit of searching in your area, find your local digital inclusion or digital equity coalition, because there is money for this and there are opportunities to partner with organizations that are doing this work. You heard it here. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A or the chat, other than you're very welcome, Cindy. Glad that you were able to join, all of you. I will say, last thing, my email address is here. Kave's email address is here. He was not able to join today, but he's definitely, his work is all over this presentation. Either or both of us would love to hear from you. And also come find me on LinkedIn. I post fairly regularly about things that are happening in the digital inclusion world and strategies to build digital resilience among your learners. So thanks, everyone. Amanda, I love that. That is great for me to hear. Thank you.
Great. I think then we will wrap this up a couple minutes early. As Sandy said, you can reach out to them via email if there's any other questions. All of this presentation will be available again for 90 days within that event platform. And a reminder to please fill out the survey that's attached to this specific session within CVent. That would be great. Again, thank you all for joining.